This is one of the most monumental moments to happen on the channel ever. Finally, 30,000 square feet of space for us to keep all of the cars all together, all at the same time for the first time. And I've been reading the comments for years. You guys have been wanting a complete garage tour. Well, today is the day. But the significance of that 30,000 square foot isn't just for the garage. It's not just for the collection. We are also joining together Bunker 2.0 in the same building as Logic, and we're going to be customizing some of the world's greatest cars. But before we get to that, we're going to do a complete garage tour, starting with the low drag E-Type that's just come off the back of Gumball. We've got all 14 cars here. Now, with the exception of a few, pretty much all of them would be great on track. Now, one of the dreams would be to arrange a private track day somewhere really cool and take the majority of these cars, hell, why not all of them, to a racetrack and put them all head to head. If you'd like that to happen, we're gonna try and reach 100,000 likes. So if you hit the like button, and if we can reach 100,000 likes, then that's an indicator that I know plenty of you wanna see that. Take out a track and do one of the best head-to-heads ever. So if you like that idea, give it a like, and while you're at it, give it a subscribe. And if we get those numbers up, let's see if we can take all of these to a track and absolutely send them all together, because that would be pretty cool. Anyway, low drag E-Type. Tasked with designing a Jaguar E-Type that could rival the track performance of its rivals, Jaguar designer Malcolm Sawyer developed a new roofline to reduce drag and improve top speed on track. The special roofline was 2 inches lower and was designed to cut through the air with greater ease, hence leading to the name low drag. As a result, it was discovered that the new shape was 10% more aerodynamically efficient than that of even the Ferrari 250 GTO. The creation of the Evolution low drag is a testament to the vision of Malcolm Sawyer and embodies every facet of what Evolution as a company have learned over the 30-year focus on the Jaguar E-Type. This retains the spirit of the legendary marque, but evolves them to entirely new levels of refinement and the expectation of a modern resto mod. The Evolution low drag houses a 4.7-litre XK engine with around 350 horsepower running on carbs and over 400 horsepower on fuel injection. Power is delivered through an Evolution custom 5-speed gearbox with bespoke ratios, 6-pot calipers at the front, 4-pot at the rear, gripping to vented discs, Nitron adjustable suspension all round, combined with a re-engineered anti-tramp system for improved traction under acceleration. So we just come off one of the most incredible adventures with this car. I can't think of a more juxtaposing environment than putting a classic British icon all the way in the Omani desert on a rally as rock and roll as the Gumball 3000. We literally flew it to Dubai. The flag drop took place in Dubai, and then we drove a few hours and crossed over the border into Oman. Drove some of the best driving roads I have ever had the privilege of spending time on. But the car to me means a lot. I mean, over 8,000 hours of work go into creating an Evolution E-Type, particularly a low drag. Every body panel is handmade on an English wheel. It's sort of hand rolled, and I think the body alone takes around about 5 months. With it being all aluminium, it's incredibly lightweight. And one of my favorite things was when this car landed in Dubai off the plane, it came with a load of paperwork, carnet, etc., import docs. And one of them was the weight of the car before it went onto the plane. Now, before a car gets put onto a plane, they have to drain almost all of the fuel. So it was a very small amount of fuel, but other than that, completely laden with all of the fluids to make this car drive, and it weighed under a ton. It was like 980 kilograms or something like that. And that's what's so special about resto mods and classic cars, is that you simply cannot achieve those sorts of numbers and driving experiences with modern day cars. And it's not because of any fault of the particular manufacturer in point. They're just laden with so many new rules, regulations, safety features. 18-way adjustable seats and 45 airbags and all this sort of stuff, that a car that weighs under a ton, that is designed to new standards, this looks like a classic car, obviously, but it drives much more akin to a more contemporary car. I mean, it's got custom coilovers, custom damping. The engine is a work of art, uprated rods, internals. It's just a beautiful, beautiful experience, but it really is a sort of artisan peak analog driving experience. And no disrespect to the low drag E-Type, and bear with me while I say this. This for me is from a personal point of view, third in line of the most beautiful classic cars ever made. And I'm going to put this in very high company. As cliche as this is, number one for me is the Ferrari 250 GTO. Second to that is the Ferrari 250 short wheelbase. And third, to my eyes anyway, is the Jaguar low drag E-Type. Now, this car originally, when Jaguar were testing it back in the day, was originally intended to go and race. It never actually ended up racing, but the aesthetic of the body lines stayed, and they eventually ended up being run by privateers. And then Evolution ended up creating their interpretation of what a road legal, more contemporary version of a Jaguar that might have raced at Le Mans would look like. And this is it. Now, the original used to have rivets all the way down here joining the panels. What is so substantial about the bodywork on this car is that other than the main panel gaps, every panel is one single piece. So this entire bonnet, it all flows as one single piece of aluminium. It's the most beautiful thing. And my favorite view has got to be the rear 3/4. This here, check this out, from here, the very edge of the bulkhead, all the way across the top of the roof, all the way down here, these flared arches to the very rear, is a single piece. It's just the most beautifully sculpted thing. It's lightweight, it's pure, it's fairly raw, but to be in, and I'll just say it, you feel like a rock star just being in this thing. It's so beautiful. And I've had the luck over the years to have driven a lot of incredible supercars, hypercars, sports cars. Nothing turns heads like this thing. On the road as well, it's so small. So even alongside more contemporary cars, it looks different. It's very small, it's very compact, but the sculpture of it, because it is literally from a different era, it turns heads, it gets appreciation. I get let out of junctions all the time. People have no problems with this thing. You get thumbs up, and if I park it anywhere or go to fill it up, there's never been a time when someone hasn't come over and started speaking to me about it. So one of the things you might notice is the car is filthy, and that's because, a little bit like a Le Mans car at the end of its race, I haven't had this cleaned since it came back from Gumballs. And this is the beautiful engine, and its attention to detail, the way it sounds. It is still running conventional carbs, which is a driving experience in itself. Evolution can put full Motec ECU and injectors on this, and they can disguise it and house it within what looks like traditional carb housing, but you can therefore have an even more modern driving experience. I wanted to run it on carbs first because I've never lived with a car with carbs, and I thought it would be cool to experience it and see what it's like to live with. Timing was set up fine, so it worked great. The experience of it is unlike anything else we're about to see, and it's also the very first classic car that we've introduced to the channel. I was just amazed at the quality, the passion, the craftsmanship, what they were doing in this, in this seemingly small outfit. Was just this incredible group of engineers kicking out incredible products. And this was ultimately the first car that we decided to add to the channel as a classic car. And we actually took delivery of it, handover of the keys. Its first drive was in Dubai. So if that's not cool, I don't know what is, and it's been a hero ever since. It's the very early stages of its life, and we're gonna do some upgrades to it. Stay tuned. Comments below, what would you like to see next from the low drag E-Type? For me, I would just like to see a scale model of it on my desk because it's so beautiful to look at 24/7.
Named after legendary F1 driver Ayrton Senna, the McLaren Senna was designed to be the ultimate road-legal track car. Just 500 Senna were made, each built around an entirely carbon monocell with 800 horsepower and 800 Nm of torque from a 4-litre flat-plane crank twin-turbocharged V8, allowing Senna to launch from 0 to 62 miles an hour in a relatively ludicrous 2.8 seconds with an ultimate top speed of 208 miles per hour.
So I don't want to peak too early, but I get asked questions in the comments pretty much every day, what is your favorite car? This is definitely one of them. I mean, it's opposite end of the spectrum. We've got two Brits here, two completely different ethos, purposes. This for me is truly, truly special because it is one of the very few completely carbon exposed body McLaren Sennas. Pretty much everything on the outside is an exposed carbon, be it green tinted carbon or more conventional lacquered carbon. McLaren only made a few of them with exposed carbon, but that doesn't mean that I don't use it. We have been on all sorts of trips with this. We flew it out to the Middle East. We've had it on plenty of track days. Road trips in Scotland, we've gone to events. This year, I really want it to be the year that we spend more time on track in a lot of these cars. And this, obviously, as much as it is a road legal car, this thing really comes alive on track. It was literally what it was made for. You can drive it to the track, fine, because it's got a plate there, but really, the defining feature of this car is its aero. There's over 800 kilograms of downforce available from this car. Obviously, a big proportion of that is from the colossal rear wing and the pretty deep front splitter, but one of the things that is not obvious at first is the ground effect. The ground effect is only really activated when you put it into race mode. The ride height slams right down, and then the efficiency of the aero flowing underneath the car, that's when the extra downforce ultimately is unlocked. Truthfully, on the road, I find a 720S or a 765 LT is probably a more comparable experience until you get on track, and this thing is a completely different animal, and it is honestly all because of that aero. Straight line, it's very similar to a 765 LT. On a circuit, it is mind-blowing. That's really why I would like to spend a lot more time on track with this car. Some of my favorite features of the Senna is the dihedral doors. Now these are heavily inspired by the McLaren F1. It almost looks like you could transplant that section of glass from an F1 into this car, particularly this tiny section here. So that is actually the only retractable section of glass in this car. Not great for a drive-through, but from a track car point of view, it's fine. One of the more unique features is the window here. Now this is made from a substance called Gorilla Glass. I think it's because it's just tough, but it provides a really unique driving experience. You can really see straight through it. And when you're on the road, to be able to see the asphalt here, white lines and things flying past, I don't actually think it has any true practical application. People would speculate, can you identify your driving line any clearer or anything like that? No, but it just looks great, and it does actually allow a lot more light inside the cabin, making it feel a bit more airy. So let's just open this up again. One of the really unique things about this car is the exposed carbon fiber continues on the inside, and it has matching exposed carbon fiber seats with a green tint. And also that exposed carbon continues as well on the steering wheel itself. But yeah, this is no garage queen. It genuinely gets used, and this year the plan is very much to use it a lot more, and definitely on track. I would love to take this to the Nürburgring. That is very much the plan. We're going to take it to Spa as well, and then hopefully later on in the year, who knows, we might make it down to Paul Ricard or Portimao or somewhere like that. Definitely Silverstone, perhaps Donington track day, but generally we want to feature more track content on the channel. One of those reasons is because this lived in Dubai for about 8 months, and so we didn't get to use it as much as I would have liked last year, but this year we're going to change that, and we're going to go full send.
Porsche GT3s are widely acknowledged as some of, if not the best sports car platforms ever made, in part because its breadth of ability makes it as good at the supermarket run as it is at the Nürburgring. But more importantly, the ingredients that make GT3s so special are the ones that underpin the thrill of driving and ignite the excitement in petrol heads all over the world. Such components are the naturally aspirated flat-six engine that revs to 9,000 RPM, while audibly suggesting that you're actually at 11,000. It has an incredible chassis, confidence-inspiring carbon ceramic brakes, and in the case of the latest 992 generation GT3, a new double wishbone front-end suspension and fancy calibration for the physics-bending rear wheel steer. Marry that to 500 horsepower, an imperceptibly fast twin-clutch gearbox, and decades of motorsport DNA, and you're left with arguably all the car you'll ever need.
All right, Porsche 992 GT3. The significance of this, I mean, if you've been following the channel for any amount of time, it's no secret I'm a massive Porsche fan, but even more of a GT3 fan. Now, not only was I really fortunate to get allocated a slot on a 992 GT3 at all, but it's the first time, and believe me, I've been asking for years, it's the first time that I was granted a PTS slot. Now, PTS stands for Paint to Sample, which is Porsche's version of paint which is outside of the standard paint palette. Now, I know that doesn't seem like a big deal. For whatever reason, on the 991 generation, both 991 Gen 1 and Gen 2, which is the previous generation to this car, the UK, I'm not actually sure it got any PTS slots. If it did, it was allocated to a very small amount of people. Got a slot on a 992, and then they said we could have a PTS slot. So I went for Signal Yellow. Now, this is actually a heritage yellow. I think it's from the 1970s. It might actually even be 1960s. It's a sort of orangey blend of yellow. I'd seen it around for years, and I always just dreamt one day of being able to spec a car in this color. The slot came through, they granted it, and here it is. Now, in a strange way, the similarities between the Senna and the 992 is that both of these cars got on the same plane at the same time to go over to Dubai, and they both lived there for the same reason, which was mostly to spend time on circuit. And that's the first time that I ever tracked this car. I never thought that the first track day I would ever take this car would be in a different continent, which is cool. So far, this car has done more miles in the Middle East than it has in the UK. It's also the first time that I got to witness the physics-bending front-end turn-in of the new double wishbone front-end suspension of the 992, which was really one of the biggest developments from 991 to 992 was the double wishbone front-end.
Listen to this thing at 9,000, it's nuts. Right, flat through this left, completely flat. Oh, wow. And you can really feel how much you can lean on this thing. There's where that Cup 2 really starts to feel quite amazing. And the direction change as well. Even though you're making quite immediate direction changes, the weight transfer doesn't upset the traction available.
Michelin out there also shod this on a fresh set of Cup 2Rs. And the transformation in grip, they've also applied a revised setting to the rear wheel steer. The way this thing absorbs corners is unlike anything else. It's truly something to behold. But my favorite thing of all is the engine. So this is a naturally aspirated 4-litre flat six with around about 510 horsepower. The fact that it revs to 9,000 RPM in this day and age is just fantastic. But it's the gearbox, the PDK, the twin clutch box, the relationship between that engine and this gearbox when you're actuating cogs, just snapping gears at around about 9,000 RPM is one of the finest driving experiences that you'll get from a road legal car. And in the 992, they just pushed the boundaries of that. It's a classic case of, and it's what Porsche do every gen. On paper, it doesn't sound like a big step up. In truth, when you drive it, it's always greater than the sum of its parts. And this is one of the greatest driving machines that wears plates that I have ever experienced. And just like Senna, we're very much intending to spend a lot more time on track this year. This will be going where that's going, so expect it on the Ring, on Spa, Silverstone, Donington, and pretty much everywhere else that we get an invite for a track day. So it's going to be super cool. This also spent lots of time abroad last year, so it didn't feature on the channel that much, but this year is where we're going to correct all of that. And who knows, maybe some road trips and rallies as well. But yeah, that's why we have this. It is a brilliant blend of road car and track car. As always, comments below. What would you like to see from the 992 GT3 other than it just being used more? Because that's what I'd like to.
The Porsche 997 GT3 RS 4-litre is a unicorn for purist drivers and a celebration of one of the greatest engines to feature in a 911 platform. Just 600 RS 4-litres were made as a swan song celebration of the Hans Metzger-developed flat 6 engine. Capacity was increased from 3.8 to 4-litre, developing 500 horsepower, but importantly increasing available torque. As far as manual driving experiences go, this car is up there with some of the very best. With less weight, more power, and revised aero and suspension, the 997 RS 4-litre is not only the last of the Metzger engines, but last of the 911 GT3s to retain purely hydraulic steering and old-school engine-out-back physics.
Right, also one of my all-time favorite. Listen, they're all favorites, but this is special because it is a final edition car. So the 997 generation Porsche RS 4-litre. It's a GT3 RS platform, but it has a 4-litre engine in it. The significance of the car and the significance of the engine is that it was a last of its kind. So it was last of what's known as the Metzger engines, because there was a very clever engineer by the name of Hans Metzger who was somewhat of an engineering hero in Porsche history. It was his engine that went into all sorts of Porsche motorsport product and motorsport campaigns, but it was the Metzger that was so characterful in the 997 generation of cars, particularly the RS cars. And this was the generation where that ended before it went to the 991 generation of cars. Now, because this car was so successful and it had such a special place in the hearts of Porsche engineers, they wanted to give it a sort of one last hurrah, a final swan song moment. And they developed this, what is known as the RS 4-litre. Now, it had revised aero and different geometry, and there was rose jointed suspension. They only made 600 of them, but it was the epitome, the incarnation of a lightweight, raw, pure driver-focused car. The manual gearbox in this is one of the most sublime actuations that you're going to feel in a road legal car. Now, it's very heavily track bias. On the road, it's quite stiff. Some might say it's a little bit too stiff. On the track, it is outstanding. It is one of those gratifying moments where when you learn to drive it, and when I say that, or when you learn the nuances of what makes this car tick, and it all comes together, the balance of it, the weight. This is last of the old school 911 physics. And what I mean by that is the engine is behind the rear axle. It still has that pendulum weight transfer effect if you have any throttle lift mid-corner. It's one of those cars that really highlights the importance of a balanced throttle, because if you're on a fairly tight turn going fairly fast and you lift off, the physics of having not a great deal of weight in the front and the majority of it behind the rear axle makes things go all sorts of light. But when you learn to trail brake it, keep the weight over the nose on the entry into corners, the rev match, the pedal placement for heel toe, the pickup of the throttle is unbelievable in this thing. Because they only made 600 of them, and it was, really invite-only car, this was a unicorn when it launched. There was very little compromise in the driver-focused ethos. It takes 100 yards to appreciate the weighting of this steering. This is the last of the pure hydraulic steering racks before they went to 991. This particular car is running the steel brakes as opposed to the ceramics, but this generation of Porsche steels has got such great feedback. I actually prefer the feel of cold steel brakes from the 997 than I did the cold ceramic brakes. Yes, when the ceramics get up to temperature on track, they're great, but as a road driving car, these brakes are sensational. Now, some things that you can't tell on camera are some of the weight-saving measures. Now, just check out the sound of this tin top. You ready? It's so hollow. I mean, when it rains on here, it sounds like it's hailing. It's such a thin sheet of aluminium. The back here, this is not glass. This is Lexan, look. This is plastic. Even the side windows, they are so, look, see that? Side windows, super thin. They did everything they could to weight save, but it's all about really the way it drives. It also sounds phenomenal. This is pre-particulate filter, OPFs, all of that jazz. There's none of that. This is just driver focused. And it is stuff of legend. I remember seeing one of these for the very first time, and it was actually in a museum, and it blew me away. And honestly, to stand here and say that I own a 997 GT3 RS 4 litre, the words leaving my mouth are still hard to comprehend, and yet here we are standing by it. Now then, this is quite unique because it is one of, I think, 2 left-hand drive cars. We've got the Volkswagen XL1, we'll show you shortly, was only available in left-hand drive, so we had no choice there. But this is a left-hand drive RS4 litre, and the reason for that is a right-hand drive one is about another £100,000 more expensive, and I just didn't see the value moving the steering wheel from there to there. This for me is one of the last of the analog. I mean, look, 992 now, it doesn't even have a central dial anymore. It's all screen. So to have the iconic original 5 dials, organic, pure, you can actually have this upgraded to receive Apple CarPlay. Other than that, everything about it is just pure. So cool. And look at this, embossed in the seats with RS 4.0.
Can you imagine if Porsche put a GT3 engine in a GT4 platform? How awesome would that be? This is a proposition that Porsche fans have been dreaming of for a very long time, and Porsche actually went and did it. The GT4 RS runs the 500 horsepower naturally aspirated flat 6 from the 992 GT3, only unlike the 911 engine, this sits mid-mounted in the chassis for a beautifully balanced car. Additionally, the engine sits right with you inside the cockpit with no traditional bulkhead separating you from the explosive 9,000 RPM crescendo. Truly one of automotive's most stimulating experiences. Porsche threw everything at the GT4 RS, with the assumption it's likely going to be the last of its kind. Lighter weight, more power, and importantly, shorter gear ratios for the ultra-fast PDK gearbox. Truly, it's hard to describe what this thing's like, so we're gonna take you on board for a quick little Nürburgring seat time.
All right, I know I've said several of these cars are my favorite cars, but honestly, this one has brought me so many smiles per gallon. Let's talk about the actual car itself before we go on to the spec of this, because both of them have great stories. But ultimately, this is the epitome of the lads down the pub having a chat about what cars they wish existed. So before the 4 RS actually came to fruition, there was the GT4, but it never had a proper GT engine in it. So for me, it was never like a thoroughbred GT product. And then one day they went and stuck a GT3 engine in a GT4 platform, which became the GT4 RS. And it is one of the most visceral driving experiences from a road legal car. Now, I mentioned earlier, the 992 sounds like a cup car. This thing actually sounds like a cup car. The internal sound of this is unbelievable. At 9,000 RPM, it sounds closer to 11,000. And why that is because they managed to take the engine out of that 992 GT3, put it in the back here, and it is, and this is the important part, it is a genuine mid-mounted engine. So it's a mid-mounted GT3 engine in this chassis, which has phenomenal balance. But I can't think of any modern or current production cars where there's no conventional bulkhead between you and the engine. What I mean by that is, when you're sat inside this car, you can reach around and put your arm on top of the engine itself. As a result of that, the sound inside is incredible. But what amplifies that even further are these things here. So these carbon fiber air intakes literally go either side of your ears. They are direct port injection from the outside of the car, and they resonate, they vibrate like these beautiful chambers of induction either side of your ears on top of a naturally aspirated 9,000 RPM flat six with absolutely nothing between you and the engine, and the sound is incredible. I've tried to capture it on microphones. It sounds great online. We went to the Nürburgring with this thing and it blew me away. It was one of the most enjoyable experiences that I've ever had on the ring, but it's not until you're in it in reality that you really appreciate why this thing is so special. We opted for the Weissach pack, which is why there's lots of sort of contrasting carbon fiber on it. The full fat Weissach pack came with the optional magnesium wheels, upgraded to carbon ceramic brakes, and importantly, it's all run through a twin clutch PDK gearbox, and very similar to the 992. Once again, the relationship between the engine and gearbox on this, it's just frictionless. It is the most incredible actuation between cogs that you will feel in almost anything at all. And for the price, yes, they're expensive. I think this particular spec was high 150s-ish, but in terms of what it does, what it offers, how it performs on road and track, it is probably the most complete Porsche platform. Now, the reason I say that it's one of the most practical, in loose terms, platforms from Porsche is because it has a frunk and a trunk. So in all 911s you have the iconic frunk because of course the engine's in the back, so you've got lots of space in here. I've lived with a 991 Gen 2 manual GT3, which we'll touch on shortly, and I've lived with that space and it's been great. Also, check this out, carbon fiber hood, lovely. However, in a GT4 platform you also as well have a more conventional boot, like so. So you've got both parts, but when you combine that with a GT3 engine in this platform, not only is it usable every single day, but when it switches on in its operating window, I mean, every time this thing approaches 9,000 RPM, I actually laugh to myself. It's just the most fantastic experience.
The beautiful thing about this GT4 is the personal journey that I've been on with it. Logic applied their proprietary removable paint solution to the car to transform it from Ruby Star to Lamborghini Viola Parsafe. Well, you heard that right, this paint is removable. Logic developed a peelable paint that is mixed and applied as real paint and can be removed as if it were a wrap.
Awesome platform aside, this is a really significant car because we've been on quite a personal journey with it. Now I'll hold my hands up, and regular viewers of the channel will know I got the spec wrong when I ordered this car, and literally as it rolled off the truck I realized that I had it wrong, and I sent it to Logic, which this is new Logic, this building we are stood in now. And the journey of this car is in part one of the reasons why we are in this new premises here. But in short, what Logic were able to do was apply a Lamborghini paint to a Porsche product. So this paint is not a Porsche paint, it is a triple layer ad personam paint from Lamborghini called Viola Parsafe. It is a very tricky paint to apply, but as I'm hoping the camera is showing, it does an amazing job of exaggerating the highlights, further enhancing the lowlights, and just overall showing off the sculpture of the car. I think also because this car is track bias, it's fairly extreme, suits this loud paint, but being able to go on a journey where we took it from Ruby Star, which was paint that I thought would look better than it did when it turned up, to transforming it with this, just got such an incredible reception online. As a result of that, the amount of GT4s and GT4 RSs that Logic got booked in the following weeks after unveiling this was crazy, and it was one of the cars which accelerated our move here. So yeah, this 30,000 square feet, which we happen to be in right now, will also be part of new Logic, which we're super excited for, and we'll be painting a lot more cars here. And this, as well as the 991, which we shall share with you shortly, is a big reason for that. So special car, special journey. This is one we definitely won't be selling for a very long time.
This is one of my all-time favorites, the 2008 Aston Martin DBS, a 5.9-litre naturally aspirated V12 developing 510 horsepower run through a beautifully weighted 6-speed manual gearbox with the power going to the rear wheels. The recipe for the DBS was all about less weight and more power, with carbon ceramic discs fitted as standard, and Aston also made extensive use of carbon fibre throughout the car, with the bonnet, the boot, the front wings, the door opening surrounds and the boot compartment all made of carbon fibre. But this one has a story.
Speaking of special journeys, this one, if you have been following the channel over the last 18 months, took a massive U-turn when we took it to Aston Martin Works, which is the official sort of heritage restoration division of Aston Martin. We took it there to have this paint applied to it. The story of this paint is a couple of years ago, we were honored to create a special edition Aston Martin DBX, which had a very special paint, which we mixed, as well as an exclusive Alcantara and different badges and exclusive wheels, etc. But this paint, we put months and months of R&D into it in order to get it to the exact shade and quality we would like. It was originally based off a Valkyrie paint tech. So when the Valkyrie program launched, they developed a proprietary paint technology, which, similar to what we've applied on the GT4 RS, just highlights the sculpture of the car. We worked with Aston to create this green, which we called Lennox Green, and that went on the very special edition DBX that ultimately went for sale around the world. And then when we took this car into Aston Martin Works for a respray, because when I bought it, the original black paint condition was pretty terrible, we thought, do you know what? That paint seems to look good on any surface it goes on. It's an Aston Martin, why don't we use that paint? So the original idea was just to go in and paint this car. However, I bought this car fairly blind. It was off market. I assumed it was coming from a good home because the other cars in the collection of the person that I bought it from were pretty incredible. And yeah, I just took it at face value that it was a fine car. Turns out, when we took it to Aston Martin Works, the gentleman in there, who I think had been working in there since 1986 and had worked on every Aston Martin produced since then, literally took out the first screw that he removed from this car in order to begin the repainting process and said, that's not factory.
It's had some not very good repairs.
It's massive.
There's a little bit of an issue there, I can see. It's actually all fell to pieces.
That's cracked.
It's beginning to delaminate. Wrong clip fix in there. You see the damage to the paintwork. Bumper's cracked as well. They've been glued in. Oh, it's got a little hole in it. Surprising the amount of stone chips. Resprayed door. Oh yes, the bonnet's been off at some point. There should be 2 clips in here. It's been off before, but they're not doing anything. Job keeps growing.
Gas struts on the door, they're both shot. There's like animals in there. I thought I got a good deal on this car. In a minute, we're going to find something serious.
I believe at some point it's had a full respray.
He said to me, he's like, that screw is not an Aston Martin screw. And I was like, what does that mean? He's like, well, let's keep going and find out. Long story short, it turned out that this car had been in all sorts of stories. So it had been in an accident.
That should be 2 clips there, not a pile of horrible glue.
Okay, so this is definitely, look at it. It's just been stuck on with some old glue. It was a mild crash, it wasn't big, but we pulled off panels and there was a cracked airbox, and on the rear there had been used wood screws, there had been some bonding glue from the building trade. The thing was a mess, and whoever had had the incident had taken it to some backstreet Bob who had had it patched up, and from the outset it looked fine. Aston took this thing apart and it was a nightmare. So this ended up going through pretty much a 12-month restoration period, which otherwise was supposed to be a couple of months paint job. This is a very exclusive badge which we managed to get sign off from the CEO himself in order to change the Aston Martin badge, and we tied in all of the external hardware with that. So we've got these sort of bronze leading edge faces on the iconic grille, and on the alloys themselves we matched in that fascia look, exactly the same bronze facing. It looks diamond turned, but actually these are all hand painted in bronze paint, and all of that came down from the theme off that badge. They even did a custom mix for the paint on the brake caliper themselves. That doesn't sound a big deal, but all of this paint has to be heat tested to make sure they are thermally capable of dealing with the temperature off of the carbon ceramic brakes. And even on these side strakes, here look, all of this pinstriping and detailing filtered down from that original Aston Martin DBX project into this car. Now, personal journey aside, the DBS for me is one of the all-time greatest Aston Martins. Obviously, it was launched as a Bond car in Casino Royale. It became iconic overnight, but the shape of it, there's something about the timeless aesthetic of this car. It's mean but sophisticated. It's naturally aspirated V12. This is a manual version, which makes the drive versus the more conventional auto just a night and day. And to be in, it's one of the few cars, and this is going to sound however it sounds, it's the most fun I've had going slowly. Because you don't have to grab it by the scruff of its neck and send it 10/10 to make this thing come alive. Because it's naturally aspirated, it's a V12, it's fairly long geared, it's got lots of torque, but it always sounds great. And because you know how it looks, you sort of drive it every now and again, your brain sort of pops into being third person watching it along the road, and you just sort of effortlessly swan along in it, and it just makes you feel so good, without the risk of having to tear around. It's, again, I suppose the reason I bought these cars is they're all favourite cars, but this truly is, because of the journey we've been on with this car, it really is one of my favourite cars. Fun fact, this actually has one of Logic's proprietary products on it, which is called liquid PPF. So everyone is familiar with conventional paint protection film, which is basically a big sticker that you stick on a car in order to help from stone chips and things like that. Logic, as a test so far, has sprayed liquid PPF on this bonnet section here. And if you compare here with here, they look identical. And that is the magic of liquid PPF. With it being a spray-on, you don't have any joins, you have no seams, you have no edges, so you'll never get a panel where an edge will lift or there'll be a join line where any dirt builds up in it. It's just a seamless protection layer that, if anything, actually adds to the glossy quality of the paint it actually goes on. So painted by Aston Martin Works, protected by Logic, and the journey started as a very personal one with Aston Martin themselves on a JWW edition DBX. So this one, very close to our hearts, and certainly not one which we are ever planning on selling. That's why this is special, and you'll be seeing more of this year. We also are planning on taking this to some shows too. We actually unveiled it at Hampton Court Palace last year. This year we're planning on taking it to shows around Europe. So let's see how it goes.
This one is a bit of a curveball for the garage, but I love it. The Thor Defender V8 from JE Motorworks is a 4.8 litre cross-country monster truck custom built by JE from the ground up. Over 300 horsepower is developed from the bespoke engine, 6-pot AP racing brakes keeps the speed behind the mass in check, and Fox racing shocks with 9 inches of total travel allow for some pretty awesome all-terrain performance. And like a lot of the cars on the channel, I've been through a personal journey upcycling this old 110 into a rock and roll resto mod.
So this is a build that really made us smile. We went through a 5-month build process with JE Engineering to build this, which ultimately ended up being called Thor for reasons that should be apparent by scale. So this is a V8 Defender, and why I'm smiling is because it's the first big boy all-wheel drive car that we've had on the channel. But it seems over the last sort of few years that the cars which mean the most to us are the cars that we've been on build journeys with. But when you build them, there's something about your own personal input into it, and the car just begins to mean more and have more stories. But speaking of stories, after the build journey with JE, as soon as this was filmed, we went straight up to Scotland towards the end of last year, and some of the footage that we managed to achieve with this by going off the beaten path was nothing short of breathtaking. Now, what's cool about it is, thankfully, our team is growing quite fast, and this was spec'd as a 7-seater, and we genuinely wanted to use it as a support car, not day to day, but when we're going on these big shoots, particularly, you know, up mountain ranges and things like that, when we're going to shows and the whole team comes along, we're throwing gear in it, just as something to rock up as the production bunker team. We couldn't think of anything cooler than building something like this. The beauty of JE is that they literally allow you to do or create whatever you want. So you've heard me talking about Q Division from Aston Martin, MSO from McLaren. JE is only that. They will build you exactly what you want. And so we actually chose a paint from Aston Martin. The interior, we looked at all sorts of brands and we came up with this beautiful cognac leather. JE developed their own embossing and contrast stitch. And then we sort of came up with different hardware. What is iconic from a design language point of view on the original Defenders is that the hinges on the doors and general hardware were all sort of outboard. So things like this, look, that historically was a fairly agricultural hinge. JE make the most beautiful billet hinges. They can anodize them in a theme to complement the overall spec of your car. And then the hardware that they put on it, I remember one episode filming this, I was joking that we were building a truck for hunting dinosaurs because look at this. Have you seen this thing? So look, you've got this beautiful JE kick plate and all of this, it's just CNC'd out of a solid block of aluminium. The details and hardware are just stunning, but what really sets it off is on the interior, or everything that you interact with, switchgear, door shuts, everything is cold to the touch. Everything about it is chunky. Everywhere you go, most people smile, and in that thing, they smile from down here, like this, and they wave. And it's just a really fun thing. Okay, for some context, my entire torso is going to kneel down next to these massive tires and wheels. Travel, as a kid, I admired Fox shocks. I always wanted an excuse to put them on a bike of sorts. Now to have them on an all-wheel drive car is pretty cool. 4 inches of lift, 9 inches of total travel. The car's around about 320 horsepower, which I know on this channel doesn't sound like a big number, but for a car like this, it's pretty impressive, which is why something of this mass needs to have 6-pot AP racing brakes on it. I bet you never thought you'd hear that, would you? On a Defender, AP racing brakes. So all in all, it's not just all show, it's also go. And when you hear this thing, because it also has side exit exhaust and your head's about there, it always sounds cool too. So yeah, proper piece of kit. It's got Apple CarPlay as well. All right, we love this thing. This is one of the cars that's actually been on the channel the longest. And why we love it is because the whole team dips in and out of this thing. It's genuinely used as a support car. Like over the years, it's been a tracking car, a camera car. We generally use it 90% of the time with the back seats folded down, and it becomes this sort of mini estate car. Only its ability to thread down a British B road in the wet. In the wet, this thing comes alive. I am not joking when I say a GT3 would have a hard time getting away from this thing in the conditions that it was developed for. And a wet, greasy British B road, this time of year actually, this thing switches on, it's fantastic. Now when I say we've had it for a while and we genuinely use it, the car is approaching 20,000 miles, which I think for a car like this over the last few years is pretty cool. Now the original intention with this car was to turn it into more of a project car, and that's something which is finally starting this year. One of the themes that I've noticed myself talking about is we've been traveling a lot, we've been doing lots of work and laying ground plans for things which are about to be announced and shared soon. And as a result, some of our own cars haven't featured as often as we might like. But we genuinely, finally have some plans in place for this. So one of the things that we'll be upgrading is the brakes. Now, out of the box, as a road car, actually the brakes are really good. But we've been through a set of pads and we're already at the stage of going through a second set of pads. But there's something about it that this thing is capable of carrying so much speed, it is actually deceptive. The other thing that's deceptive is in isolation, you think it's a small car. It's actually quite a big car. Now, I probably haven't parked it next to the best car to set some context, but it's actually quite a large car. It's got a fairly long wheelbase for a two-door car. And sometimes you'll look down at the speedo and you'll be traveling at a speed where you sort of have to check yourself and think, how have I achieved this speed with such little effort? But as a result, you end up stamping on these brakes fairly hard, fairly often. So we are exploring calipers, pads, fluid lines and potentially discs too. Also, this car from factory came on Michelin Pilot Sport 4S, and when we end up doing the upgrades on the car, we're going to swap it out in time for spring summer and get it on a set of Cup 2s. Now, I've not experienced this on a set of Cup 2s, and even on the 4S, the lateral grip is phenomenal. So I can't wait. Clocks go forward, temperature up, Cup 2's on. This thing's going to transform. We're going to take you along for the ride. So stay tuned on this. It's about to have a facelift. The color will change as well. It's going to go into Logic for a new paint job. Genuinely haven't decided what that color will be yet. We're always open to options, so comments below. What color should we spray the GR Yaris? And other than that, stay tuned, because this thing, yeah, we're about to go full send in it. Can't wait. Right, this is the car that's kind of the odd one out, really. This is the Volkswagen XL1. Why I say it's the odd one out, the majority of these cars is kind of about outright performance. This is the opposite, and that's kind of where the story of this car starts. Ultimately, I'm just a nerd for the engineering story of this. So, the XL1 was commissioned by the then Group CEO Ferdinand Piëch, and it was commissioned alongside the Bugatti Veyron. The remit from the Bugatti Veyron was to try and achieve the most extreme at one end of the spectrum, which was the world's fastest road-legal production car. At the other end of the spectrum, Volkswagen were looking to develop the world's most fuel-efficient car, and that resulted in this. Now, why it's interesting is that on paper, until you reach the spec of the engine, this reads like a thoroughbred hypercar. In fact, if I was to tell you that this was closer to a McLaren Speedtail than it was any other car here, you'd be like, what are you speaking about? But it still has the lowest drag coefficient of any production car made. It has cameras for wing mirrors, it has magnesium alloys, it has carbon ceramic brakes, it's running a twin clutch box, the entire tub is carbon fiber and it has carbon fiber panels, dihedral doors, and McLaren F1 inspired windows. It's by far and away the lightest car here. So I was impressed by the low drag E-Type at around about 980 kgs. This is around about 700 kilograms. It's ultra lightweight. Going back to it sounding on paper like a hypercar, it is a mid-rear engined hybrid, and the whole thing is designed for ultimate efficiency. And I just found it so interesting that in order to become the most efficient car, it followed a very similar engineering path to creating the ultimate top speed car. So speed tail aside, the main difference is the engine. That has a 2-cylinder diesel hybrid and the Speedtail doesn't. So as a result, it's capable of over 300 miles per gallon. The thing is just the wildest engineering story. They only made 200 of them. Well, that's not true. They made 250 of them. 50 of them were retained for posterity R&D by the Volkswagen Group, and only 200 of them were ever released for sale. Now, as far as pricing goes for a new Volkswagen, at the time when it launched, it was around 100 grand, which in 2011 was a very expensive Volkswagen indeed. So what they ended up doing was allocating a few cars to a few dealerships around the world, and the application to buy one was more of a raffle. So you would put your name in and you would express interest, and if you were awarded that slot, you would be given the opportunity. Most people I speak to haven't heard of it. That's why I enjoy it, and I really enjoy nerding out on its engineering story. I mean, one of the subtle design traits of this is that the driver's seat and passenger seat, they actually overlap slightly. So it's a staggered seating. The reason for that, the shoulders are able to overlap, allowing the body of the car to be made a lot thinner, which has created that ultra low drag. Detail from an engineering point of view is nuts. This needs its own documentary in itself. I'm just scratching the surface of its story, and it's just a beautiful thing. It's like a small sculpture on wheels. It's got this almost Art Deco futuristic vibe about it. The other cool thing is, this is one of the very few originally allocated UK cars. They were only all available in left-hand drive, but as a UK car as well, it is ultra rare. So this is our Vorsteiner McLaren 720S, or 820S as we now like to call it, because it's been through a subtle engine and exhaust tune, getting another 100 horsepower out of it. But this has got a lot of story, not just on the car itself, but the bodywork and paintwork that Logic did on this has blown me away. It is one of the cars that we are the most proud of because of the amount of work and skill that Logic put into making this paint look so fantastic. The car was originally a Velocity Edition 720S, which was one of the early launch spec cars. Theory behind the paint on that car was that it was supposed to have this graded paint, this sort of fade from darker to lighter paint, but truthfully, I didn't think it was executed very well. It looked more like the nose had been dipped in some black and then it sort of went red, and that grade, which was the idea, was never truly there. So what we thought was to Velocity Plus this car by taking it to Logic and having removable paint applied. Yes, you heard that right. If you want to, you can peel this paint off. Not that we would ever do that, because the hours that went into this paint were unbelievable. So from nose to tail, it goes from Norello red all the way to Velocity red. There are 7 different paints from nose to tail, and they are each individually blended. They're not flicked in, and it creates this genuine transition from dark to light. Now on top of that, we also had the full carbon fiber Vorsteiner kit, which is why it kind of looks a little bit like a 765 LT. It's got some McLaren P1 in there, but everything's just a bit more aggressive. We've got a much deeper front splitter. We've got these arch vents, which is now obviously akin to something that you would find on an LT product. Only if you compare the Vorsteiner vents with the standard LT vents, they're a lot more aggressive. They're almost spine-like. And then around the rear, this is where things get all sorts of cool, because we installed a Rift exhaust kit. And this has been part of the tune to extract the extra 100 horsepower out of this engine. And honestly, all that has taken so far is that exhaust and a tune in order to get that.
Ready?
I guess. Am I? Whoa! Oh my God! The great thing about this 4-litre twin turbocharged engine is that it is full of torque. So even playing with that tune, we also unlocked some more torque. And the way this thing goes down a road is terrifying. It is honestly, it is nut speed. I wouldn't be surprised if in a straight line, this might be as quick or quicker than the McLaren Senna, because it doesn't quite have as much aero to hold it back under drag. So cool thing. We've already had some adventures with this car in its previous spec up in Scotland. We've just done some phenomenal road trips, but what we haven't had it on yet is a drag strip to see what that new tune will get out of it in terms of straight line punch, and we've not really spent much time with it on track. So if we can take it somewhere where we can fully unlock it and share it with decent audio, that's the plan for this year. The other thing as well, we really love going to shows. One of the great things about shows is we get to meet a lot of you guys. Most of the time when we're talking, it's online, comment section, etc., which is cool, but I love being able to bring cars down to shows and sharing them with you. So this will also be appearing at a few shows throughout the year. If you want to know what shows they are, stay tuned to my Instagram account. We'll always announce way in advance as to where we'll be, where these cars will be, because if there's one car that the camera isn't doing justice, it's this thing. You need to spend some time walking around it, picking up on the details. To you on the camera, this might look like a dark red. This is actually a red exposed carbon fiber, which actually has its own fade in it, and the carbon gets brighter and brighter as it goes back, and it's something you really need to see. It's also something that I'm incredibly proud of Cameron and the team at Logic, because this entire thing, including the exhaust fitment and tune, was all done under the Logic roof. So to have this as a showcase, super cool.
BMW hasn't taken any shortcuts on the details of the new M3 Touring. Like the saloon, the body shell is totally bespoke to the M3, with wider rear arches and significant strengthening to the underbody, which includes a brace borrowed from the M4. The wheels themselves are pretty substantial, with a staggered set of 19-inch at the front and 20-inch at the rear, with tyres running a 275 section Michelin on the front and a 285 section at the rear. In the UK, we only get the Touring as a competition spec car, meaning the 3-litre twin-turbocharged straight 6-cylinder engine develops 503 brake horsepower and 650 Nm of torque. Power is delivered through all-wheel drive, allowing for a 0 to 62 mile an hour of just 3.5 seconds.
In a strange way, we're going to relate this to the GT4 RS in that this was also the lads down the pub having the chat, when are they going to make another Touring? Can you imagine a new M3 Touring? And we were going on about it for, as it happens, 10 years. It was 10 years since they made a previous generation Touring platform, and lo and behold, here it is. You'll all remember when this thing was teased online, it melted the internet. I would imagine BMW dealers around the world probably had no more phone calls than they did the day that this was leaked online. And it really is the epitome of practicality and performance in one package. Now, being the M3 competition, this is also X-Drive, so it's all-wheel drive, so it puts the power down. Now, as beautiful as it looks right now, yes, we are going to paint this. We're going to paint this in Logic Paint. Now, anyone who isn't familiar with that product, don't get your pants in a twist. It is removable paint, but it is real paint. So we can mix any color. We can go back to any historic BMW color. We can use a color from any other brand. If you could order an M3 Touring in any color in the world, what color would that be? Comments below. We're going to take you through the process of the transformation of this car, and it's not going to stop with the paint. There's also a few goodies, tweaks and tunes taking place in the background too. But overall, we're just super excited and feel very lucky to have got such an early allocation on such a special car. It's skyscraper grey right now. Inside is BMW M3 carbon sports seats in Kailami orange, which is this nice contrasting pop. I think the orange is this like inviting glowing orb of color that invites you inside. So we need to take that into account when we are talking about the paint. But as I've mentioned with a few of these cars, a lot of the hope this year is to get on the road and visit tracks all around Europe. There is literally no better support car to join us, bring bags, camera gear, team. We love taking the Defender up to Scotland, but when we're on the road with some fast cars, we need a fast car to keep up and carry plenty of bags. This is going to be the ultimate version of that. Also, if you come around the back, this functionality. Whoo, split tail. Now, this isn't just for putting bags in. We do a lot of filming and tracking out of the back of cars, and to not have to have the entire boot flapping around. The wind resistance of this is pretty strong, so we could still pick up some speed, but honestly, as just an added bonus for us in our unique situation, this split cab here, split tail as it were, yeah, it's got some pretty heavy friction on it. That is a super cool feature. So yeah, all in all, it's fast, it's practical, it looks cool, it's all-wheel drive. People online seem to really like it, so we'd love to hear from you what you would like to see happen with this car. And we're just super excited to kickstart the season and have this trailing us pretty much everywhere we go. So stay tuned. If you like BMW M3 Tourings, now's the time to subscribe because we're about to unlock some pretty cool content with it. Okay, so I really got to stop saying this, but this genuinely is one of my favorite cars. And not just because it's a fantastic car, but from a sentimental point of view, it has been a massive part of the channel, a massive part of the journey since day one. Now, this is a story which I actually haven't shared, but this originally was Sir Chris Hoy's car. Anyone outside of the UK, he is one of the most highly decorated cyclists of all time. I think he's 11 times cycling world champion and 6 times Olympic gold. We met through racing. His car was for sale at that time, and I was specifically looking for a Crayon 991 Gen 2 manual GT3 with no roll cage. Lo and behold, Chris had exactly that car. Casually asked him about it, and he was like, oh, actually, I've been really lucky to get a slot on a GT3 RS, so I'm selling my 991 Gen 2. And I said, have you found a buyer for it yet? He goes, not yet. I said, you have now. So I ended up buying that car off Chris, and since then, it's done 55,000 miles. 55,000 miles. When I say that I daily drive this thing, 55,000 miles on a GT3, I think is a pretty strong effort. And it's done everything: road trips, rallies, track days. It's been around the Nürburgring. It has been all over Europe, and it's been a massive part of the journey, both on screen and off screen. While I've been building this channel, this has been my mode of transport. It's been a project car, but it just means a lot to me, because when I think about this, it's been part of the formative years, really, of what we've been doing here. And it's literally the car that led to us standing in this building right here, because this is the first car that we took to Logic for our first foray into removable paint. I was skeptical at first. Cameron did a demonstration on this car as to how fantastic it was to remove the paint, not apply the paint. There are other products out there, and all they talk about is applying it. But the USP is taking it off. And in my previous role in the world of PPF, car care, etc., we'd had clients come in and say, could you remove this removable paint for us? And we would, and it used to be a nightmare until I met Cameron at Logic, who had developed a proprietary additive, which he would include in his paint that allows it to come off just like a wrap. For me, that was a game changer. Long story short, I was so impressed with this job that we ended up having other cars painted. We had the GT4 RS painted, we had liquid PPF. You heard that right, liquid PPF applied to the McLaren Senna. The journey was so cool that my business partner and I ended up investing into Logic, and the first stage of that investment is growth, and this is why we're in this building here. So while our bunker version 2 will be in a garage section over there, ultimately 3/4 of this building will be dedicated to new Logic, and the whole journey started here with this paint job. So it means a lot. It's an important car for many reasons, but that is the icing on the cake as to why this thing is so special. Now, speaking of special, you've got to check out the interior, because we just went through a highly substantial upgrade program on the interior, also as a result of Logic in collaboration with a company in group called Penzo. Join me inside. So the idea was, at 50,000 miles, we wanted to give this car a bit of a facelift, refresh, just give it a once-over to make it feel new again. And that came off the back of, quite frankly, the original Alcantara steering wheel had a lot of DNA on it. It was just 50,000 miles of Alcantara. Doesn't wear that well when you're using it pretty much every day of the week. So it started with, shall we retrim this wheel? As part of the development plan of Logic is to introduce an all-service one-stop shop for high-end customization, mods, etc. So in collaboration with Penzo, we designed this entirely bespoke interior. Now, we wanted to go for a sort of nouveau heritage feel. So we've got this woven Alcantara on the door cards and the inner sections of the seats. We've sort of hole punched these seats with rivets, which is something you would find on something like an original GT40. But we've also put some extra Logic tricks inside, such as the carbon seats themselves. These are tinted blue carbon fiber now. All of the inserts in the doors and the dash, tinted carbon, and subtle things. Since the steering wheel was retrimmed, we've got matching contrast stitching on there, brand new gear shifter. Now, the big job though is actually the lower section of the car. There's one thing retrimming seats, there's an entirely different thing retrimming all of this section down here. Transmission tunnel, new dashboard, even in the back, it's all complementing matching orange leather. The guys at Logic and the guys at Penzo, who ultimately did the retrim, did such an incredible job. So we're blown away by it. We're on 55,000 miles now, and the plan is, and it always has been really with this car, I always said if I managed to get my hands on a manual 991 Gen 2 GT3, I would run this thing to 100,000 miles. We're over halfway now. This is its midlife facelift, and we're going to plan on sharing the next 45,000 miles, and no doubt they are going to be pretty special. The other thing which I should touch on is the exhaust. We actually had a JCR exhaust on this car. We also fitted a ducktail, and the reason for this was because it is a manual car. Really, the only difference between a 991 Touring and a 991 GT3 is the fact that they took the wing off it. The early concept was, could we make this car into a Touring? And you thought, what's the point in that? Tourings exists. Could we do this halfway house? Tip of the hat to the retro theme. We managed to get a ducktail on this, and then we made it sound really good with an exhaust from the guys over at JCR. Now, the other feature that we have from JCR that you can't see if you join me around the front, the GT3 RS carbon bonnet. So you can just see it there, these subtle streaks there. They were not available on the GT3. That was exclusively reserved for carbon bonnets on GT3 RS. And you can see right here, underneath, full RS style carbon bonnet. It's a beautiful thing. Aesthetically, subtle touch. Psychologically, saving a little bit of weight. And also the interior trim carries on the inside of the boot too. So yeah, it's completely transformed this car. I honestly can't believe it's the same car. It's been a while to, go through all of these different stages, and it's not complete. We're going to be changing the color of the wheels. We're going to be changing the color of the brake calipers to be complementary of the interior color. And JCR are also in the middle of developing a custom valve for the exhaust so that we can open and close it depending on when we feel like being rowdy or not. So genuinely one of my favorite cars. This will be a car that stays with me forever. I'm not sure anyone would want to buy it after I'm finished with it anyway, because it'll be over 100,000 miles, but it just means too much. It's got too much of my own story in it. I've just really enjoyed every single stage of customization. Cool journey, cool car, onwards to 100,000 miles. All right, next up, we've got the Ferrari 355 GTS manual. That's the really important part. Now, a few years ago on the channel, we started a series called Modern Classics, which was a look back at all of the iconic cars over the last few decades, many of which were our poster cars growing up. For me, the 355 was literally a poster car. One of the most enjoyable driving experiences going at acceptable road speeds. It sounds like Michael Schumacher going road legal pace. Our new favorite game is truck spotting because it acts as a reverberation surface for this exhaust. Watch this. Draw up alongside a truck. And in this day and age, when people are chasing 0 to 60 times, Nürburgring lap records, cars are getting heavier, to experience something that is just for the thrill of driving is ultra rare. And this epitomizes exactly that. It's not about lap times, it's about good times. This is full of 90s Italian hangovers, which is fine, it gives it its own character, but it also set us the challenge of how can we take this and take it to the next level and resto mod this car. What would that journey look like? Now, I'm not going to give too much away right now, but we're fairly deep down the rabbit hole of planning a complete resto mod on this 355, and we'll be sharing that with you shortly. Now, I'm not just saying this, we've gone a lot further than you might expect, and genuinely, if there was ever a time to subscribe, to check out some content which you definitely would never have expected, now is the time to hit that button, because the journey we're going to go on with the 355 as a platform is pretty substantial. That's all I'll say right now. But for me, on a personal note, poster car growing up, GTS, which is effectively the Targa, where you can remove this section of the roof and store it behind these seats, that allows that flat plane crank, naturally aspirated V8 to resonate inside that cockpit. Manual gearbox, you just change gear for no reason at all, just for the enjoyment of interacting with that box. Brakes are terrible, seating positions a little bit offset, steering wheel's fat and old. It's characterful in a fun way, but we're going to take it on a journey and we're going to apply some modern engineering techniques which didn't exist when this was built in order to see how far we can take it. So stay tuned. Big things in the pipeline for the Ferrari 355. And here's one you definitely haven't seen because we added this to the garage last week. This is the 1995 Porsche 993 Carrera 4. Amazingly, these two are the same era. These would have been on the cover of car magazines at the same time. The reason that we've added this to the garage is yet to be shared. I'm not going to go into it just now, but we're going to be going on an extremely substantial journey with it. But top line, this is the 3.6 litre. They also did a 3.8. This is the 3.6. I've got to tell you, I drove this thing home expecting it to be a little bit rough around the edges. The previous owner had literally loved this car and he was downsizing his home, and we managed to buy this car online. I hadn't gone to see it. It was completed on an auction, turned up, took the keys. Speaking of keys, check out this. It's even got, I mean, the history and authenticity of this car. Look, it's got the original 90s Porsche immobilizer. It looks like a USB key, but they didn't really exist then, so I'm not sure what that is. Picked up these keys and drove it home, and it's super, super sweet. We've got massive plans for it, but as I was driving it, I was like, this might be a little bit too good to change. So we're gonna give you a full in-depth walk and talk of this car in a separate video because it leads on nicely as to the purpose that we bought it. But obviously this is a car that's in the garage. We couldn't not share it, but I think what's about to happen is going to be even more exciting. Now there's one thing that we cannot convey on film, which is the smell. This is a gateway to the 90s. It just preserves the oxygen in it. I don't know if it's the materials used at that time, but you go from current day to the 90s in one smooth motion. It's such a nostalgic kick. I love this thing. Speaking of nostalgia, I'm not sure if the camera's quite picking it up, but this has quite the blue interior, very of period. Now it is, you know, rough around the edges in places, but honestly, the way it drives, it had a clutch service, in fact, a complete clutch swap actually, around about 10,000 miles ago, and that bites wonderfully. No slip, no rattles. Honestly, the integrity of the body, there's no squeaks, there's no rattles. It's just doing its thing. It's brilliant. I suppose the cliche or stereotype comes from somewhere. It's a Porsche. We've really enjoyed filming project cars over the last 12, 18 months. They've got some of the best engagement and comments from you guys. So every year we're trying to step it up, and this is going to form one of those, and it's going to be a hell of an adventure. But speaking of adventure, this car is incredibly well documented. All of its history, all of its adventures. And I think I wanted to share with you some fascinating insights because this is literally this whole car's life. This is why I was so impressed. If anyone young is watching this, these are called tax discs. And once you've paid your tax on your car, it used to go in the window like that. And then someone would come along and check it and go, naughty, naughty, you're out of date. But there's been a lot of money going into this car. Every one of these, most of these are an invoice. 1,800 quid, like what is that for? Lambda sensor, lambda probe and speed sensor, parts 800, labour 1,500, VAT 274, 1,800 pounds, thanks for coming. Every one of these, look, it's probably had half the value of this car put back into it over the years. So up here, this is the original finance document for this car. So it says at the top, it's stamped the 23rd of August, 1995. How much do you think this car was back then? 1995, 63,400 pounds. In the 90s. That's like a full, that's probably more than the average house price then. It's unbelievable. So the balance after the deposit, this is back in 1995, 34,680. And there was 36 monthly payments after that of just under £1,000. £1,000 in 1995 a month. It's like crazy money. Unbelievable. So yeah, I think it's easy to sort of pass these off as old Porsches, but back in the day, these were serious. part of me just wants to sort of sit here for a moment and just take it all in, really. It was, coincidentally, it is literally 3 years to the month since we took delivery of the keys for Bunker 1. And you know, back then, Bunker 1, it was never intended to be a garage because we had a couple of cars, right? So to walk down this line of 14, and actually, there's a few cars which I haven't even touched on, which are in the team. We've got a production bunker van, we've got a deranged pickup truck, there's a Tesla which has gone to one of the businesses in London, more on that soon. And this all started really, it was me and my mate, we went into partnership at the beginning of 2019, and the idea then was just to really grow opportunities for the channel. And we always set ourselves the goal of, you know, growth, but it was all about content, it was all about cars. We always had aspirations to make the best car content that we could. That's why this channel started. It was all about sharing these incredible machines with you guys down that lens. And to think that 3 years ago, we started together with 2 cars. In fact, I think it was just 3 cars. And now I can't believe I've just done a walk and talk down 14 cars. And it's just amazing to think that it all started off the back of this channel. And I suppose, without sounding too soppy, thank you. Really, the channel exists because you guys watch. I'm just super proud. We've worked with some of the best car brands in the world. And to think that just a few years ago, I mean, I was proud then, but to be able to share these, and really the idea that this year and ongoing, we really want to be sharing these a lot more. Off screen, we've just been laying so many foundations in the background to launch what we're about to share, that it's taken a lot of time and energy. There's been a huge amount of travel. This year, we're going to use these cars, and in a few weeks, I still can't believe what I'm going to tell you in a few weeks' time. Just going to melt some stuff. So thank you. Thank you to the team behind the scenes, my partner in Bunker Group. Thanks very much. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Ciao.